March 27th, 1943. 26,000 feet above the Tunisian coast, the air is thin enough that every breath requires conscious effort. Hauptmann Franz Schiess leads his Schwarm of Messerschmitt BF 109 Gustavs in a wide patrol arc, scanning the crystalline blue sky for the American heavy bombers intelligence reported would be hitting Tunis harbour. His oxygen mask hisses with each inhalation, the rubber pressing cold against his face despite the morning sun blazing through the canopy. Then he sees it, a single contact, low and to the west. The distinctive silhouette registers immediately in his combat-trained vision. Twin booms, central nacelle, tricycle landing gear, a P-38 Lightning, alone and apparently unaware of the 4 German fighters above it. The American is at 25,000 feet, climbing slowly, perhaps separated from his formation or lost. Schiess smiles behind his mask. This will be quick. He has 47 victories painted on his rudder. 19 of those kills came from twin-engine aircraft, Bristol Beaufighters, Bristol Blenheims, even a few of the American B-25 Mitchells. The doctrine is simple, proven through dozens of engagements. Twin-engine fighters are heavy, slow to maneuver, vulnerable. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Zerstörer BF 110 had taught the Luftwaffe that lesson over Britain in 1940. Every German fighter pilot knew it as gospel. When you see 2 engines, you see a target. Schiess signals his wingman with a hand gesture. Standard attack. Diving pass from above and behind. Using the altitude advantage to build speed. Fire 1 concentrated burst into the cockpit or engines, then extend away before the lumbering target can respond. He has executed this maneuver so many times it has become mechanical, almost boring. But victory is victory, and this American is about to become number 48. The Messerschmitts roll inverted and pull through into steep dives. Schiess watches his airspeed indicator climb. 400, 420, 450 kilometers per hour. The P-38 grows larger in his reflector sight, still climbing, still apparently oblivious. He is 500 meters away now, closing fast. The Lightning's twin Allison engines trail thin contrails in the cold, dry air. 400 meters. His finger moves to the trigger. Then everything Schiess thinks he knows about aerial combat stops making sense. The American sees them. The P-38's nose drops slightly, then snaps left in a brake turn so violent that Schiess actually flinches in his cockpit. But that is not what shocks him. What shocks him is what happens next. The Lightning does not simply turn, it climbs, hard. The aircraft pulls into a climbing spiral that should be aerodynamically impossible for something weighing 5 tons, both engines screaming at full power, the twin booms describing a corkscrew through the thin air as the pilot trades, speed for altitude with an aggression that makes no sense. Schiess pulls back on his stick, trying to follow, trying to bring his guns to bear. His BF 109 Gustav groans under the G-load. The horizon spins. His vision starts to narrow at the edges as blood drains from his head. He eases off slightly, breathing hard, trying to track his target. The Lightning is still climbing, still turning, and impossibly it is pulling away from him. At 26,000 feet, the Messerschmitt's Daimler-Benz 605 engine is giving him everything it has. At this altitude, his fighter should dominate. German engineering, precision manufacturing, the distilled tactical wisdom of the Jagdwaffe, all of it concentrated in a thoroughbred aircraft designed for exactly this kind of engagement. But the American is climbing faster. The gap between them widens. Schiess levels off, breathing heavily, watching the Lightning continue upward to 28,000 feet, then 29,000, before finally rolling level and accelerating away to the northwest. His wingman's voice crackles in his headset, confused and shaken. "Herr Hauptmann, what was that?" Schiess does not answer immediately. He is too busy trying to reconcile what just happened with everything he thought he understood about twin-engine fighters. The P-38 should not climb like that. The mathematics do not work. Twin engines mean twin drag, double weight, compromised aerodynamics. The Americans built this thing wrong. Everyone said so. Galland said so. Intelligence said so. Every combat report from the Battle of Britain confirmed it. But Schiess just watched a twin-engine fighter outclimb his Messerschmitt at altitude. Not by a little. By a lot. The American pilot had not just evaded his attack. He had dominated the vertical fight, taken control of the engagement geometry, and forced 4 experienced German fighters to break off without firing a shot. "Return to base," Schiess says, finally, into his radio. His voice is calm, professional. But inside, a small seed of doubt has taken root. Perhaps the Americans know something the Luftwaffe does not. 5 months earlier, in October 1942, that doubt would have seemed absurd. The P-38 had only recently arrived in North Africa, deployed with the 12th Air Force to support Operation Torch. German intelligence had obtained detailed photographs and performance specifications from various sources, including captured documents and reconnaissance flights over Allied airfields. The assessment from Luftwaffe headquarters was unequivocal. The Lightning was a reconnaissance platform pressed into fighter service, dangerous only to unwary pilots who forgot basic tactical discipline. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, commanding Jagdgeschwader 77 in North Africa, received his first intelligence briefing on the P-38 in November 1942. The presentation included grainy photographs showing the aircraft's unusual configuration and a technical summary compiled by German aviation engineers who had studied every available detail. Twin Allison V 1710 engines, 12 cylinders each, liquid-cooled. Total horsepower, approximately 2,600 at war emergency power. Maximum speed at altitude, approximately 630 kilometers per hour. Service ceiling, 12,000 meters. Armament, 4 Browning 50 caliber machine guns and 1 Hispano 20mm cannon, all nose-mounted. The photographs showed an aircraft that looked like a committee compromise, as if American engineers could not decide whether they were building a fighter or a light bomber and split the difference. The twin booms extending back from the wings created a distinctive forked tail, unusual and somehow ungainly to German eyes accustomed to the clean lines of the BF 109 or the brutal efficiency of the Focke-Wulf 190. Steinhoff studied the images and came to the same conclusion every other Luftwaffe officer reached. This was another Zerstörer, another failed attempt to make a twin-engine fighter competitive with single-engine designs. The Americans, for all their industrial capacity, clearly did not understand air combat fundamentals. The doctrine was simple enough that it could be explained to every new pilot in 5 minutes. Fighters win through maneuverability, speed, and climb rate. Twin engines double your weight and drag. More weight means lower climb rate and slower acceleration. More drag means reduced top speed and inferior turning performance. The only advantage twin engines provide is redundancy if one fails, useful for patrol bombers flying over oceans, irrelevant in fighter combat, where battles last seconds and damaged aircraft rarely make it home regardless of engine count. Germany had learned this lesson expensively. The Messerschmitt BF 110 Zerstörer was conceived in the mid-1930s as a heavy fighter, a bomber-destroyer and escort aircraft that would use twin engines to carry devastating firepower deep into enemy territory. On paper, it looked formidable. 4 20mm cannons plus multiple machine guns, long range, good speed. In practice, it had been slaughtered over Britain. When Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring ordered the Zerstörer units to provide fighter cover during the Battle of Britain in summer 1940, RAF Spitfire and Hurricane pilots had destroyed them wholesale. The BF 110 could not turn with single-engine fighters. It could not climb away from attackers. Its size made it easy to spot and easier to hit. By September 1940, entire Zerstörergruppen had been withdrawn from daylight operations, reassigned to night fighting where their heavy armament and twin-engine reliability actually mattered. That experience created institutional knowledge that every German fighter pilot absorbed during training. Twin engines in a fighter role meant target, victim, kill credit. So, when the P-38 appeared in North African skies, Luftwaffe pilots approached it with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. Here was another misguided American design, proof that industrial capacity could not compensate for doctrinal ignorance. The first engagement seemed to confirm this assessment. On November 19, 1942, elements of Jagdgeschwader 53 engaged P-38s escorting B-17 flying fortresses near Tunis. The German pilots attacked from above, using standard Zerstörer tactics: dive through the formation, fire into the twin-engine fighters from astern, extend away before the escorts could respond. Several lightnings went down. The Americans fought defensively, staying close to their bombers rather than pursuing the attacking Messerschmitts. German pilots returned to base satisfied. The Americans flew their twin-engine mistake predictably, cautiously, like men who knew their aircraft was outmatched. But not all the engagements followed the script. Lieutenant Hans-Joachim Marseille, already a legendary ace with over 100 victories, encountered P-38s over Egypt in late November 1942. His after-action report contained an unusual note of respect. The Lightning pilots he faced had not fought defensively. They had turned into his attack aggressively, using their nose-mounted weapons to fire head-on, forcing Marseille and his wingmen to break off their pass. Marseille noted that the P-38's concentrated firepower created a cone of destruction that made head-on attacks against it nearly suicidal. He also observed that when properly handled, the Lightning could sustain turns that seemed impossible for an aircraft its size. His conclusion: dangerous if the pilot knows what he is doing. Most do not yet, but they will learn. Marseille was killed in action 3 days later when his BF 109's engine failed, and he struck the aircraft's tail during bailout. His warning about the P-38 learning curve went largely unheeded. Through December 1942 and January 1943, the pattern continued. Luftwaffe pilots claimed dozens of P-38 victories. Intelligence reports documented American losses. The twin-engine fighter seemed to be performing exactly as German doctrine predicted, marginally effective in specific circumstances, generally vulnerable to experienced single-engine opposition. Then the Americans changed their tactics. The shift happened gradually, without any single decisive moment. But by February 1943, Luftwaffe pilots started noticing differences in how P-38 formations fought. Instead of staying tied to bomber formations in close escort, Lightning flights began operating more aggressively. They climbed to meet German fighters rather than waiting to be attacked. They used speed and altitude advantage when they had it. And most puzzlingly, they seemed to be climbing faster at altitude than previous encounters suggested they should. Hauptmann Kurt Bühligen, leading the 3rd Gruppe of Jagdgeschwader 2, engaged P-38s over Tunisia on February 15, 1943. His flight bounced a formation of 6 Lightnings at 24,000 feet, diving from 28,000 with every advantage. Surprise, altitude, numbers. The P-38s did something unexpected. Instead of diving away or turning defensively, they climbed into the attack. Bühligen found himself in a climbing scissors with the lead American, both aircraft pulling vertical, trading airspeed for altitude in a test of power-to-weight ratio that the Messerschmitt should win automatically. Except it did not. The Lightning matched his climb, then exceeded it. At 26,000 feet, Bühligen's BF 109 was struggling, engine labouring in the thin air, controls going mushy as airspeed bled, off. The American was still climbing strongly, his twin Allison engines apparently indifferent to the altitude. Bühligen broke off, diving away to regain speed, conceding the engagement. 2 of his pilots were not as fortunate. The other Lightnings had climbed into favourable positions during the furball, and concentrated 50 caliber fire shredded one Messerschmitt's wing. The pilot bailed out. The second German fighter took cannon hits to the engine and barely made it back to base trailing smoke. Bühligen filed a combat report that night, noting the P-38's unexpected high-altitude performance. He recommended revised tactics and requested intelligence updates on potential modifications the Americans might have made to their engines or turbochargers. The response from higher headquarters was bureaucratic and unhelpful. Current intelligence indicates no significant modifications to P-38 aircraft. Continue employing standard engagement tactics. But pilots in the field knew something had changed. The Lightnings were not flying like targets anymore. What German intelligence did not know, could not know from aerial observation or captured documents, was that American maintenance crews in North Africa had begun implementing unauthorized field modifications to P-38 intercooler systems. These modifications dramatically improved engine performance at altitude by increasing cooling airflow and reducing intake air temperatures. The intercooler system on the Lightning was brilliant in concept but conservative in execution. Exhaust gases drove turbochargers that compressed intake air, forcing more oxygen into the cylinders at altitude where atmospheric pressure dropped. That compressed air heated up, reducing its density and negating much of the benefit. So, Lockheed engineers designed intercoolers, heat exchangers that cooled the compressed air before it entered the engine. In theory, perfect. In North African practice, problematic. Intercoolers used thermostatic valves to regulate cooling airflow, maintaining specific temperature ranges that protected engines from thermal shock. But those temperature ranges had been calibrated for moderate conditions, not for combat operations in desert heat where ambient temperatures exceeded 110 degrees Fahrenheit. A staff sergeant mechanic, name lost to history but hands skilled from Depression-era automotive work, looked at the system and saw the bottleneck. The thermostatic valves were protecting engines that did not need protection, while throttling performance that pilots desperately needed. He bypassed the valves, locked the intercooler exit doors fully open, and removed some internal baffles to maximize cooling airflow. The modification violated technical orders and warranty specifications. It also worked. Pilots flying modified P-38s reported dramatically improved climb rates and engine performance at altitude. Cooler intake air meant denser air. Denser air meant more oxygen per cylinder firing. More oxygen meant more power. The twin Allison engines, freed from the thermal constraints of conservative engineering, delivered performance that shocked both American pilots and German opponents. By March 1943, dozens of P-38s in North Africa were flying with these modifications. The Luftwaffe had no idea why the Lightning's performance had suddenly improved. They only knew that tactical assumptions made in November were getting pilots killed in March. Franz Schiess, the Hauptmann who watched a lone P-38 outclimb his entire Schwarm on March 27th, was determined to understand what had changed. Over the following weeks, he flew multiple missions, specifically hunting Lightnings, studying their behavior, testing their limits. He learned that the P-38 still had vulnerabilities. Its initial roll rate was slow, particularly at high speed. A German pilot under attack could snap roll and first dive, using the Messerschmitt's superior roll characteristics to create temporary separation. The Lightning's compressibility problems at high speed meant it could not follow effectively in near-vertical dives above 500 km per hour, but he also learned to respect what the twin engines provided. Above 20,000 feet, particularly above 25,000, the modified P-38s held a decisive advantage in sustained climbs. They could fight vertically in ways single-engine fighters could not match. And perhaps most significantly, the redundancy of twin engines meant damaged. Lightnings kept flying when equivalent damage would doom a Messerschmitt. Schiess shot down his first P-38 on May 21, 1943, over the sea south of Sicily. It was his 50th victory, a milestone he celebrated with subdued satisfaction. The kill had required perfect positioning, patient stalking, and a moment when the American pilot made a critical error in a turning engagement. Schiess exploited that error with a 3-second burst that destroyed the Lightning's left engine and set the boom ablaze. But even as he watched the American aircraft spiral into the Mediterranean, Schiess felt no contempt for the design. The twin-engine fighter he had initially dismissed was now his most dangerous opponent. Over the next 4 months, he would shoot down 16 more P-38s, becoming the Luftwaffe's leading lightning killer. Each victory required more skill than the last. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this, as American pilots learned to exploit their aircraft's strengths and minimize its weaknesses. The tactical evolution became a deadly dance. German pilots developed specific techniques for fighting P-38s at altitude. Never engage in a climbing fight above 20,000 feet unless you have a massive energy advantage. Use diving attacks to build speed, make one firing pass, extend away before the lightning can reverse. If caught in a turning fight, flick roll and dive immediately. Do not try to outturn the American. Most importantly, never attack head-on. The concentrated nose-mounted firepower gives the Lightning overwhelming advantage in frontal engagements. American pilots, meanwhile, learned to fight to their strengths. Use the twin-engine power advantage to control the vertical fight. Force German fighters to climb where the Lightning's altitude performance dominates. Stay fast. The P-38's straight-line speed exceeds the BF 109 Gustav below 25,000 feet. Use that speed to dictate engagement timing and exploit the redundancy. If one engine takes damage, shut it down, feather the propeller, and fly home on the other. German single-engine fighters do not have that option. The result was a grudging mutual respect. German pilots who survived encounters with well-flown P-38s acknowledged the aircraft's capabilities in their combat reports and private conversations. American pilots who fought experienced Luftwaffe opponents learned that the Lightning's advantages were situational, not absolute. Johannes Steinhoff, commanding JG-77, shot down 4 P-38s in a single engagement over Italy in July 1943. His after-action report was brutally honest in its assessment. The Lightning is faster than the BF 109 Gustav in level flight below 7,000 meters. It outclimbs us decisively above that altitude. Its turning radius, properly flown, is smaller than our aircraft. The only clear advantage we maintain is roll rate and diving speed. Engaging Lightnings at altitude without significant tactical advantage is not recommended. That report reached Luftwaffe headquarters in Berlin and generated considerable discussion. Some officers dismissed it as defeatist. Others argued that German fighters needed upgraded engines or new designs to compete at altitude. The debates were ultimately irrelevant. Germany was fighting a war on multiple fronts, resources were increasingly scarce, and wishes could not manufacture miracles. What mattered in the cockpit was that German pilots faced an opponent that violated their doctrinal assumptions. The P-38 was not supposed to work. Twin engines meant vulnerability. Everyone knew that. Except the Americans had somehow made it work anyway, and now Luftwaffe pilots were paying the price for underestimating what good engineering and aggressive tactics could achieve. The altitude advantage proved particularly decisive in bomber escort missions. Allied heavy bombers operated at 25 to 30,000 feet, altitudes where the P-38's modified engines performed optimally. German fighters attempting to attack those bombers found themselves engaging Lightning escorts that could climb to intercept faster than the attackers could position for their runs. On April 5, 1943, 26 P-38s from the 82nd Fighter Group escorted B-17 formations, striking Axis shipping in Tunis harbour. Luftwaffe fighters rose to intercept, including elements of JG-53 and JG-77. The German pilots expected a conventional fight. Use altitude advantage to dive through the escort, hit the bombers, extend away. Instead, the Lightnings climbed aggressively to meet them. At 28,000 feet, the P-38s held superior position and power. The engagement devolved into a sprawling dogfight where the Americans dictated terms. When it ended, 82nd Fighter Group pilots claimed 31 enemy aircraft destroyed for minimal losses. That kill ratio was almost certainly inflated. Overclaiming was epidemic in all air forces during World War II, driven by the chaos of multi-aircraft engagements where multiple pilots fired at the same target and everyone claimed credit. But even allowing for significant overclaiming, the engagement demonstrated that P-38s could dominate at altitude when properly employed. German pilots who survived that mission returned to base shaken. The fork-tailed Americans had fought with a confidence and aggression that made no sense given the presumed limitations of their aircraft. Intelligence officers debriefing the pilots noted repeated references to the Lightning's climb rate and high-altitude maneuverability. One lieutenant stated flatly that fighting P-38s above 8,000 meters was suicide unless you could attack with surprise from higher altitude. The psychological impact was as significant as the tactical. Luftwaffe fighter pilots had grown accustomed to owning the vertical fight. German training emphasized energy fighting, using superior climb and dive performance to control engagement geometry. When the Americans introduced a fighter that could match or exceed German climb rates at operationally relevant altitudes, it disrupted tactical assumptions that had governed air combat since the Spanish Civil War. By summer 1943, even skeptical German commanders acknowledged the P-38 as a legitimate threat. Major Adolf Galland, General der Jagdflieger and one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced fighter leaders, flew a captured P-38 in France to evaluate it personally. His report to Goering noted that while the Lightning had weaknesses, particularly in roll rate and high-speed handling, its power, firepower, and range made it a formidable escort fighter. Galland recommended developing tactics specifically for defeating the P-38, rather than treating it as simply another twin-engine target. He also recommended that German fighter development prioritize high-altitude performance to counter the Lightning's advantage in that regime. Neither recommendation could be implemented effectively. By mid-1943, Germany was losing the war of attrition. Experienced pilots were being killed faster than they could be replaced. Fuel shortages limited training hours for new pilots. Aircraft production struggled to keep pace with losses. The Luftwaffe was being ground down by an enemy that could absorb losses Germany could not. The P-38 played a significant role in that attrition. Between January and December 1943, Lightning units in the Mediterranean and European theatres flew thousands of sorties, claimed hundreds of enemy aircraft destroyed, and escorted bomber formations deep into Axis territory. German fighters attempting to stop those bombers had to go through the twin-engine American fighters they had once dismissed as easy prey. Franz Schiess, the ace who had watched a lone Lightning outclimb his entire flight in March, continued hunting P-38s through the summer of 1943. He refined his tactics obsessively, learning exactly how far he could push his BF 109 before the Americans' altitude advantage became insurmountable. He studied gun camera footage from successful engagements, identifying the brief windows where German roll rate superiority could be exploited. By September, Schiess had 17 confirmed P-38 victories, more than any other Luftwaffe pilot. He had become the specialist, the ace other pilots consulted when they needed advice on fighting Lightnings. His guidance was consistent: respect the aircraft, never underestimate the pilot, and only engage when you have decisive tactical advantage. On September 2, 1943, Schiess led a scramble against American B-25 Mitchell bombers attacking rail yards near Naples. His unit engaged the P-38 escort at 26,000 feet. In the fierce battle that followed, German pilots claimed 10 Lightnings destroyed, but Schiess's BF 109 Gustavs, Werk No. 16022, was hit by 50 caliber fire that destroyed the cooling system. He attempted to nurse the damaged fighter back to base, but the engine seized over the Gulf of Salerno. Schiess bailed out, but his parachute deployed partially, falling too fast. He struck the Mediterranean at high speed, 30 to 50 kilometers southwest of Ischia. He was 22 years old, 67 victories in 657 combat missions. 17 of those victories were P-38s, making him the highest-scoring Lightning killer in the Luftwaffe. The irony was profound. The twin-engine fighter Schiess had once dismissed, then learned to respect, then hunted obsessively, had ultimately contributed to his death. The American pilots whose skills he had studied and countered had refined their own tactics in response to his. The evolutionary pressure of combat had turned both predator and prey into specialists, each adapting to the other's capabilities until margins of superiority, measured in split seconds and single mistakes. Other German aces learned similar lessons. Kurt Bulligan, who eventually scored 112 victories on the Western Front, recalled fighting P-38s in North Africa with mixed feelings. In one engagement, his flight of 6 Messerschmitts engaged 8 Lightnings and shot down 7. He noted that the P-38s burned easily if you could hit them in the right places, but he also acknowledged that properly flown, the Lightning was formidable. The key phrase was properly flown. Early in the North African campaign, many American pilots were new to combat, still learning their aircraft's capabilities. They made mistakes, turning when they should have climbed, diving when they should have extended, fighting German strengths instead of American advantages. German veterans exploited those errors mercilessly, but by mid-1943, the surviving American pilots were no longer novices. They had learned through the same brutal instructor that taught German aces, combat that killed the slow learners. The veterans who survived knew exactly what their P-38s could and could not do. They knew that above 22,000 feet, they could outclimb almost anything the Luftwaffe flew. They knew their nose-mounted weapons gave them devastating firepower advantage in head-on passes. They knew that if one engine took hits, they could limp home while their German opponents went down. The institutional learning curve favored the Americans. The United States could afford to train pilots thoroughly, rotate combat veterans back to training commands to pass on lessons learned, and replace losses with fresh crews who benefited from accumulated tactical knowledge. Germany, by contrast, was burning through experienced pilots it could not replace, and sending inadequately trained replacements to the front where they died quickly. This dynamic meant that even though German pilots developed effective tactics for fighting P-38s, the overall trend favored the Americans. Lightning units gained experience while Luftwaffe units bled expertise. The aircraft that German intelligence had dismissed in late 1942 was by late 1943, forcing the Luftwaffe to fundamentally rethink high-altitude fighter tactics. The broader strategic implications extended beyond individual engagements. The P-38's range, enabled by its twin engines and fuel capacity, allowed missions impossible for single-engine fighters. The most famous example occurred on April 18, 1943, when 18 Lightnings from the 347th Fighter Group flew from Guadalcanal to intercept Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's transport over Bougainville. The mission required flying 430 miles over open ocean at wave-top altitude to avoid radar detection, engaging Japanese fighters, shooting down Yamamoto's bomber, and returning to base. Total flight time, approximately 3 hours. No other American fighter could have accomplished that mission. The P-38's twin Allison engines, so often dismissed as a liability, provided the endurance and reliability required to execute one of the war's most significant aerial assassinations. German intelligence officers analyzing the Yamamoto mission noted with alarm that the Americans possessed a fighter with greater range than many German bombers. The implications for escort missions were obvious. If P-38s could fly 870 miles to shoot down an admiral, they could certainly escort bombers deep into Axis territory. That range advantage, combined with improved high-altitude performance from field modifications, transformed the strategic bomber campaign. By late 1943, P-38s were routinely escorting B-17 and B-24 formations to targets German fighters had previously defended with relative impunity. Luftwaffe pilots attempting to intercept those bombers faced Lightning escorts that could climb to engage, stay with the bombers throughout the mission, and still have fuel reserves for the return flight. The cumulative effect was attrition the Luftwaffe could not sustain. Every mission cost experienced pilots, aircraft, and fuel reserves that could not be replaced. The P-38, working alongside P-47 Thunderbolts and later P-51 Mustangs, helped establish the air superiority that made Allied victory possible. By early 1944, German pilots facing P-38s at altitude knew they were fighting at a disadvantage. Intelligence reports acknowledged that the Lightning's twin-engine configuration, far from being the liability doctrine predicted, provided crucial advantages in power, range, and survivability. But knowing this did not make the problem solvable. Germany lacked the resources to develop competing designs or upgrade existing fighters to match American performance. The assessment that had begun with contempt in November 1942 evolved through respect by mid-1943 to resignation by early 1944. The P-38 worked. German doctrine said it should not, but combat results do not care about doctrine. Pilots who survived the war carried memories of specific encounters that challenged their assumptions. Herbert Kaiser, who scored 68 victories, remembered his first P-38 kill in January 1943. He also remembered that the Lightning should be respected as a formidable opponent, faster and more maneuverable than his BF 109 Gustav, especially since the Gustav was slowed by underwing armament pods. Jan Schild, who encountered P-38s over Italy, found them faster in climbs than his own aircraft above certain altitudes. The testimony was consistent. The twin-engine American fighter was dangerous, particularly in the vertical fight where its power advantage dominated. The story of German pilots and the P-38 is ultimately a story about assumptions confronting reality. Luftwaffe doctrine, built on genuine combat experience with the Bf 110 Zerstörer, concluded that twin-engine fighters could not compete with single-engine designs. That conclusion was reasonable based on available evidence. It was also wrong, or at least incomplete. What German doctrine failed to account for was that a twin-engine fighter designed from the beginning to exploit its configuration's advantages, rather than trying to mimic single-engine characteristics, could succeed where the Bf 110 failed. The P-38's unconventional twin-boom layout minimized drag. Its counter-rotating propellers eliminated torque effects. Its distributed weight improved certain handling characteristics. Most importantly, its twin Allison engines, especially after field modifications, improved their high-altitude performance, delivered power that transformed tactical capabilities. German pilots learned these lessons through the most unforgiving teacher available. Combat that killed those who learned too, slowly. The evolution from dismissive contempt to tactical respect occurred across thousands of engagements, each one teaching small lessons at high cost. By war's end, no German pilot who had survived encounters with well-flown P-38s dismissed twin-engine fighters as automatically inferior. The broader lesson transcended specific aircraft types. Innovation in warfare comes from questioning assumptions, even assumptions built on genuine experience. The Americans looked at twin-engine fighter design, studied what had failed, and asked whether different engineering could produce different results. The answer proved to be yes, much to the surprise of German pilots who discovered the hard way that doctrinal certainty can be dangerously misleading. Franz Schiess learned that lesson on March 27, 1943, watching a lone Lightning outclimb his entire flight at 25,000 feet. The twin engines he had been taught to see as weakness were in that moment the Americans' decisive advantage. Power, redundancy, and range concentrated in a design that refused to conform to conventional expectations. 6 months later, Schiess was dead, shot down over the same skies where he had hunted the aircraft he had come to respect. The P-38 flew on, its twin booms cutting through Mediterranean air, escorting bombers to targets deep in Axis territory, proving day after day that unconventional solutions can succeed when properly implemented. The Germans engaged one P-38 at 25,000 feet, expecting an easy victory. Instead, they realized that twin-engine altitude power, when harnessed by good design and aggressive tactics, rewrote the rules of aerial combat. That realization came too late to change Germany's fate, but early enough to save thousands of Allied lives. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who refuses to fight the way doctrine says they should. The P-38 Lightning was that enemy, and, German aces paid the tuition fee in blood and wreckage across the skies of 3 continents. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.